Hello and welcome. I'm Patrick Curtis, your host and chief monkey, and this is the Wall Street Oasis podcast. Join me as I talk to some of the community's most successful and inspirational members to gain valuable insight into different career paths and life in general. Let's get to it. In this episode, James McKinney, host of the super popular podcast, The Startup Story, joins us to talk about his winding path and current success. From a finance and accounting major in undergrad at a non-target to losing it all, James shares some of the highs and lows along his journey, as well as this one career tip he'd give his younger self. Enjoy. James McKinney, thanks so much for joining the Wall Street Oasis podcast.
Oh man, I'm so excited to be here. This is incredible.
So it'd be great if you could just give the listeners a quick summary of your background.
Wow. Just recently, a couple weeks ago, I launched my own episode of my startup story. So as of right now, I'm a creator and host of The Startup Story, similar to what you're doing for those in the finance industry, but really around entrepreneurship and startups and small businesses.
Cool.
My background is rooted in accounting and finance. So it's kind of funny that where I'm at today comes through the same journey that a lot of your listeners are at now. And so, undergrad accounting in Cal State Fullerton. I took an accounting 101 course in junior college, and I thought, well, this is stupid easy. And so I immediately started selling bookkeeping services off of an accounting 101 course.
Okay.
So for all the CPAs out there, you're probably just cringing right now. But so I had a few bookkeeping clients based on that, and I thought, man, if I'm gonna actually have people pay me for this, I should probably know a little bit more than accounting 101. And so at that point, I shifted gears, and I wanted to be a teacher most of my life. I shifted gears completely and pursued accounting in that last semester of school. And I put my way through school. I was in the Marine Corps. They helped pay for it. I was working daytime, go to school at night. But last semester, I'll never forget sitting in, I don't know what class it was, but I had 21 units in the last semester because I wanted to be done. I was over. It was like a 6-year journey for me. And I remember thinking, I don't want to do this anymore. And I wish I was a teacher. But I was too close to being done, so I just had to finish it. So I finished an accounting degrey, and at that time, I was working for a home builder in finance. Home building was huge in the early 2000s. It was the heyday of home building. And then from there, was with a real estate investment firm.
Yep.
And from the real estate, and again, accounting as well. From the real estate investment firm, launched my first business, failed miserably. Which is a great story in and of itself, about endurance and perseverance, and just the how to finance deals is really what that's a story about. And then as I was licking my wounds for that, I went to Disney, and Disney hired me operational finance. And as an entrepreneur, I'm genetically wired to not sit still for too long. And after a few years with Disney, started working on a mobile app, left there. And that was in 2015. And so that was probably my last accounting and finance gig.
Okay. So you've been kind of out on your own now for 4+ years.
Yeah. So sales was my first transition out of Disney because of what I had done in Disney. I was hired by a company called Vision Media that services all the Hollywood studios. And what I had done in Disney, I was hired. This is an interesting story.
Let's go back further. Let's go back all the way to undergrad. So like accounting, finance major, it sounds like by the time you finished, you said, I don't really want to do this, but I'm graduating. This is what's going to pay the bills. So I got to do it. So tell me about that, when that first week on the job kind of coming out, or was it just like, you're just down, depressed, or were you like, hey, at least I have a job? What was the thought process? Did you at least have time to go out? Because I know a lot of the users, they go into these high finance careers, or a lot of listeners, and they don't even have time to enjoy their lives outside of work. Did you at least have some stuff you would do?
So I went to the Marine Corps to pay for college, right? My college years were not the typical college years. I was, working 40, 50 hours a week and going to school at night, take a quick 20-minute power nap in the parking lot before you go into the evening classes, and I was ready to roll. Those were my college years, power napping. And so I had a job at the end of it, within the home building industry. And I loved the job because I loved the company. And that's really what it was. It wasn't
why did you love the company? I mean, that's kind of an odd thing to say.
Oh man, the company was Pulte Homes. At the time, they were the nation's largest home builder, and really, it was the heyday of home building. Like you couldn't,
exciting.
It was exciting because there's a couple things, right? Operationally, we were supporting, a home builder would buy these lots of land, right? Acres, hundreds of acres, and you'd put up 1,500 homes, right? Well, in the home building industry, you are managing all construction costs and labor allocations down to a house level.
Right.
And so it was fascinating to see how this massive organization can manage, I think at the time was like 35,000 homes a year across the nation, and getting everything down to a house level to know exactly what was the profitability of that house. And because it was the Wild West back then, like, the moment a models now open sign like went up in the track, like people were lining up, and 80 people deep in line, just willing to take whatever house they could because they knew the phases were just going to sell like that fast. I mean, the early 2000s were just super hot for home building. So the parties were outrageous. I mean, it was, I'm not saying it's like Wolf of Wall Street when you watch that. It's not like that at all, but it was an incredible time. It was an incredible time. Yeah.
Fair. Okay. So, was it tough to even get this job, or they were just hiring bodies at that point? Like you had accounting, finance, they were just like, come on in, or was the interview tough at all?
That's an interesting. See, now you're stretching my memory here, because I remember. So that job, so again, was not my first accounting job. I was an accounts receivable rep or clerk. It wasn't a manager by any means. I think it might have been a title account receivable manager, but there's no people. It was just me, a small company. And that really was like Wolf of Wall Street, man. That was a crazy environment. Anyway, so home building was really like my first, what I call my my first grown-up job, if you will.
So how did you transition from that AR to that job? Like, how did you actually?
If there's anything I'm really good at, it's wordsmithing. I do not lie, but a janitor is a sanitation engineer.
Got it.
So, and my resume was very well wordsmith that got me the interview. In college, very much I had my target date on there, so it's like they knew I wasn't finished yet, but I was in the last year, so they saw the horizon. But they also, at that time, I had my bookkeeping business I had experience with, the accounts receivable gig I had experience with, so they just saw the years within it.
Yep.
And then the interview, the interview is so critical. And so that's how I got
Tell me about what was the interview tough? Was it just the typical behavioral interview questions, like tell me about yourself, tell me a weakness, that type of thing?
Exactly. Typical behavioral stuff. What's your weakness, what's your strength? And obviously having those canned answers is key. But the thing for me, and I think part of it has to do with the fact that I am an extrovert, right? On every single personality test, I am 100% extrovert. I love people. I love their stories. Mm-hmm. And there's a book called Strength Finders 2.0, and if your listeners haven't read it, I highly advise reading it, because it'll help you understand the things that you are great at. Therefore, you can bring people around you to fill in the weaknesses. But one of the things that I'm really good at is winning people over. There's just I think it's because I authentically care about people. So my interviews are very much them asking me these behavioral questions, but the whole time I'm sitting here thinking, well, how can I best serve them? Like, ultimately, like they're wanting someone for this role. So a lot of my answers would come back with a question like, well, as you're evaluating for your hiring for this role, like, how does this person you hire bring the most value to you? Mm-hmm. And immediately they're about to disclose exactly what it is they're looking for. And you start using those words back in your language.
Right.
Oh, we're looking for someone who's a team player and someone who's willing to
did those skills come naturally to you though? That sounds like sales, right? It's almost like, tell me about your pain points, and then you're like, well, this product solves all of those, or this service solves all. Is that something naturally that you picked up, or did you take any courses?
So my dad is an entrepreneur, right? So I was raised in an entrepreneurial environment. There are certain things that are genetic. Again, you can't make a person care about people naturally, right? Like, for some people it is exhausting to be around other people.
Yep.
That's not the case for me, right? But being raised by an entrepreneur, one of the things that I tell my kids all the time now, words matter. So I'm super intentional on word choice. And your listener should be intentional on word choice as well. Like, just don't go into any interview thinking that you can't allow for a nice breathing pause before you answer and process the words you're about to say, right? I mean, so many times someone asks questions like, so explain a weakness. Well, one of the things, and they go back into this canned response, and it's like,
Right.
but you just disregarded the first 5 minutes where they told you exactly what they were looking for as you fill that role.
Right.
It's just being a listener, and so many people just are not good listeners.
Yeah, they have a canned response. They go into it and they basically aren't actually taking any input or any feedback from the other person across the room. It's literally just, okay, I'm going to get through my quote, perfect answers, which don't exist.
Yeah.
And I actually think what's important about the practicing in the mock interviews is not the getting the canned response right. I think when you get confident and comfortable enough where you can take those pauses, and so you're focusing on the delivery and not so much on, the words, the words that are around what the words that are going to come out. And it's really about the pauses, the connection, the eye contact, all that stuff that's critical for actually getting an interview.
100%. And the other thing too, man, like it's funny, like, so I haven't interviewed for a job for
a long time.
I mean, let me think here. I mean, I think Disney was 2010. So it's been 9 years since I've actually interviewed for a job.
I think longer for me, man.
Yeah. And what's interesting about it, like, I remember at the time saying to myself, like, man, if being a professional interviewee was a thing, that's what the job I would want.
You'd be amazing.
Because in my mind, it's just like about meeting people and hearing their stories. And the reason being, if there's any interview tips, and I apologize if this is not what
No, I love it.
We're seeking after me, but if there's any interview tips that I can give to someone listening, the idea should be about conversation. Mm-hmm. Do not go into an interview thinking, I hope I get the questions right. It should be about, how can I engage the person that I'm talking with? Because if you leave a memory at the end of that conversation as, wow, I enjoyed being with that person, that interviewer automatically is going to look back on their experience with you fondly, and that is what matters. I always shot for, if I can make them laugh once, great. Like, there's a certain things I looked for. Like, can I make them laugh? Can I keep them smiling? Can I get them to answer a question, that was friendly, not adversarial, right? Like, again, the weakness one is a great one. Like, have a good answer for that, but then in turn say, while that's one of my weaknesses, one of my strengths is about delivering value to my bosses. And so, what do you look for in your team members,
Right.
And then having them deliver that to you. So seek the conversation. Don't just go in thinking that the dies have been cast and you're just going to get whatever you get.
No, I agree 100%. I think it's critical to try and turn it into a conversation, try to make that personal connection, not just, get through the answers correctly. I think people get really nervous about the technical portion of the specifically investment banking interviews.
Oh, of course.
So they study. It's funny because they get the course and then they focus on the technical module and they're just drilling on the accounting questions. And then they get in there and they're asked to walk me through your resume or like tell me a weakness. And they think these canned responses are good or are good enough. And it's like they're missing this huge opportunity to actually set themselves apart because everyone else is getting the technicals right too. It's so.
And and let me ask you, from someone who's been in the high finance world, the technical is sometimes very different than the practical.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Oftentimes it's just to see if they've done their homework.
Yeah. And I think it's important to understand that you can have all the technical you want, but there's also the practical. So even though you may know all the technical, understand the person you're talking with wants to know that you're a student because they're going to want to bring the practical.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think it's important to know that investment banking at its core is a sales job too, especially as you get more senior.
Oh, see, now you're selling me on being an investment banker.
Hey, if you could get through the rungs of, if you could survive through the analyst and associate years, you'd be great.
Hey, I saw Wolf of Wall Street. I know how great it is. Yeah. Just kidding.
So I guess let's go back. So Disney, what was that like?
Oh man, that was a great time. One, there is a dopamine hit that just comes from working with arguably one of the 2 or 3 globally known brands, right? Coca-Cola probably being number 1, Disney being up there. And so that's just cool to say. I mean, my kids were excited to say their dad works for Disney. And So, I mean, that was an awesome experience. But I was hired. It was interesting. I was hired, again, coming off of a failed business that I had. Entrepreneurs are really the least desirable hire for enterprise companies. We're a squirrely batch, right?
Yeah.
I mean, total flight risk, right? You know, but I was, again, back to the interview, like I was candid. You know, I shared the challenges that my family was going through because of it, and that.
Did you have to take out a lot of debt? Were you in the whole?
Oh, I lost everything. I mean,
What was the startup? Talk to me about that.
So that business was a printing and promotional product brokerage, and so as companies like Disney needed branded product, it was my job to source it, and I was the middleman. I'd get margin on top of that. I was one of 12 that were able to participate in a $100 million contract with LA County. And so I started this at age 30, I think it was. And I had good success fairly early on. And obviously there's a lot of arrogance and pride that can come with that. And I didn't have mentors most of my life. My entire life, my story, and maybe you can include a link to my startup story episode where I unpack this in even greater detail. But most of my life is defined by just trying to figure it out because I didn't have mentors.
What about your dad?
Well, I'm a child of a divorce, so my dad was part-time, right? Like, you know, I got to visit him on the weekends and be around him. So I got to see what he did. There wasn't the dialogue, right? There wasn't the conversation of how do you finance this deal? And what are some creative ways to finance a deal? Like, you know, purchase order lending, things like that. Like, I didn't know any of those things.
Right.
And so I got this deal that was a $600,000 in purchase order. I had 50% margin on it. Like, it was a healthy deal.
Yeah.
But in my mind, I needed the cash to fund it. So I had drained the 401k. I had maxed out the credit cards. I had leveraged the house. I had it all in to fund $300,000. And in all government contracts, there is a clause that is a cancellation without cause clause. And again, in my mind, as a young person, thinking that what government agency is going to cancel a contract? This is crazy. Like, this is not the contract that gets canceled. Like maybe a freeway construction or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And so, I'm getting product made in China. Had to send a 50% deposit, so 150K goes out. Ready, product's ready. The final payment goes out 3 days after that final payment goes out. I get a letter in the mail. Within the 10 seconds it took to open that letter, because I knew it was on the other side, I lost everything. And there was no recovering it. China wasn't going to give me my money back.
No, they weren't.
I couldn't talk to LA County, and they kept referring back to the cancellation clause, and there's a whole other side story as to why that canceled. But again, just completely over leveraged myself, not seeking mentorship to understand like what are some ways to creatively finance this. At the time, the idea of just
probably would have been on the hook though. Even if
now, if I were to ever get that deal, I could think of 3 immediate ways in which I would finance that without leveraging anything that I had. Right? Obviously, first receivable financing is the first thing.
Okay. So tell me about that. That's interesting.
So receivable financing, you have an invoice or a purchase order from a client. There are companies out there that will lend mostly up to 80%. That seems to be 80% seems to be like the industry average. Some are less, but it all has to do with what is their safety net, right? And so, LA County would have been a fairly safe safety net.
Right.
The cancellation clause probably would have gone to 80% financing down to maybe 60% financing.
That would have covered $3,300K you needed.
Exactly. That would have covered exactly what I needed, right? So, so that's part of it. But again, there's they make good margin.
It's pretty expensive, right?
It's not cheap, right? But again, I had $300,000 on the deal.
To play with,
I would have been totally fine. I didn't know about this at all at the time.
You would have been fine taking $250 or whatever.
Exactly. The other thing too is like there are high net worth individuals out there that are just looking for the easy deals. Within the space I was playing with, I'll never forget it. Government was what I focused on at the time.
Yep.
And so in the government space, I started seeing the same people over and over again. Well, one guy that was winning these deals that I couldn't touch because sometimes his selling price was what my costs were. And what he was doing, I was based in Southern California at the time, and he was this elderly Jewish guy down in Lake Forest, And all he was doing, he didn't invest anything into stocks or anything like that.
Yeah.
His retirement was simply turning deals like this. So he would take a $3 million deal on a 5% margin,
right,
and turn it within 90 days.
And
that's good money in 90 days on a so and he would just do these. And again, as someone who's trying to support a family, build a business, not just can I fund this year,
right?
You just couldn't compete with those things. So I would say there are people out there like that just have money, like, hey, well, if in 90 days I can get a 10% return, which
do it.
take that out across the year, you're looking at 30 to 40% return. Like, they'll do that all day long.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Yeah,
it's tough to compete there.
It's hard. But again, at 30, the things you don't know are the things that can hurt you, which is why I'm all about, and it's why I love what you're doing, is with Wall Street Oasis, that the idea of just mentorship and information, like mentorship is so critical.
Yeah. So you're basically, you're licking your wounds, trying to get out from under this.
Yes.
What was the product that you were getting made? First of all, what was it?
USB drives. So for LA County, USB drives. So USB drives had LA County Sheriff on them. That's all I said. That's all it was.
Oh my gosh. So they get sent to you, or like where?
Yeah.
Do you still have these?
They got sent to me. I don't have them now. They got sent to me, and they weren't even. So this is. Man, like this is gonna make it makes me feel old saying it, but it's definitely gonna make some people like. So now you can buy like a 16 or you can buy a 32 gig USB drive for like $16, right?
Right.
Like now, I mean, storage is a commodity. Yeah. Back then, to get a 1 gig USB drive was gonna cost you about $30. Right. So this was an imprinted USB drive that wasn't even a gig. It was like 500K or something like it was, it was crazy. So no, I had a very large supply of USB drives for quite a while. Yes.
And what did you do with those?
Tried to sell some via eBay, it was a slow process. I couldn't get rid of all of them. It reached a point where it was donation. So,
yeah. Okay. So you had a lot of USB drives.
Yeah, a lot of USB drives.
Start interviewing right away. What was the thought process?
Right away. So once I told my wife we were losing everything, because she was a stay-at-home mom.
Yeah.
Once I told my wife we were losing everything, that was a hard conversation nonetheless. But immediately I knew I had to get back on the horse and provide for my family. And so it was just about going to my business network. At that time, 2 kids.
2 kids. Okay.
And I was still 2 kids, but at the time we had 2 kids. Immediately went through my LinkedIn profile and just started like seeing everyone I was connected with on what relationships were there, and just started and reaching out to them saying, hey, shutting down the business, looking for something for the next couple of months, and it was the next couple of months. Like, I wasn't looking for something long term. Partially I was looking for the next couple of months. Sometimes a temp hire is a lot easier than getting a full-time gig, and at the time it was the latter part of the year, so the holidays were coming up, so it was kind of a good positioning. So I'm all about connections and networking. So my first stop was not the open market. It was all about who do I know. And from there, I got that job, and I was miserable at it. I hated it. Not Disney. This was with a semiconductor company.
Okay.
Hated it. The culture was toxic. It was an absolute horrible experience.
Okay.
And somehow, some way, I couldn't tell you how it was, an opportunity at Disney came across my desk, and I submitted for it. And Disney's one of those places where if you don't know someone, like, don't even apply, don't even bother. Like, you've got to know someone, and knowing someone could simply be being connected to one of their recruiters on LinkedIn. But I didn't know anybody. I just submitted for it, and sure enough, I got an interview, and I was like, "This is unbelievable!" Like, and and in the interview, I was meeting with an executive, and he said, "So, I see you had your business. What happened there?" And I explained it to him, and he's like, "So, where do you see yourself in 10 years?" And I was like, "Well, to be honest," I said, 10 years, I couldn't tell you. I said, "But, I can definitely tell you 3 years I'm here."
Mm-hmm.
Like, I was just candid, because again, the idea for recruiters even will tell you in enterprise companies that they aren't keen on hiring people that had past businesses, because they just know there's an itch that has to be scratched, and I don't care what you do in an enterprise company, it's not going to.
So you were there for a while, though.
I was there 5 years.
You kept your word.
I did. Well, 3 years was about keeping my word for sure.
Okay. But you stayed on
the 4th and 5th year, I stayed on because around that fourth year, is where this idea for my next startup started percolating. And because of what I had taken my family through at that time, just 4 years before, I wasn't about to just jump ship and pursue.
You were a little trigger shy. You're like,
exactly. Like I was just like, let me figure this out, and let me find different ways to finance it. And so that's where I started, friends and family fundraising and things like that. And so, but my gig at Disney was amazing. I got hired to oversee the revenue operations for the Disneyland Resort. So really it was about the reconciliation of what do the POS terminals say versus what does the currency vault receive? Like where's the reconciliation of the cash management? And that was my gig for about 90 days. And then at the 91st day, my executive calls me in his office like, so you used to run your own business, right? I said, yeah. He's like, how would you like to start a brand new business inside of Disney? I'm like, oh yeah, like yes.
That sounds awesome.
And sure enough, so I got to build an entirely new profit center inside of Disney, where as the company, specifically Parks and Resorts, didn't need assets anymore. So ride vehicles, animatronic figures, signage, branded assets. As they didn't need things anymore, I got to build an infrastructure that had appropriate handling with high net worth individuals, internal secured auction sites. I got to build an entire profit center around selling Disney, highly sought after Disney assets.
Interesting. So you were basically almost like having an internal eBay for Disney signage and all this stuff, which I'm sure is super high demand.
Dude, like the demand for Disney branded things is crazy. This is how crazy it is.
Yeah.
John Stamos, for those that may know him as Uncle Jesse from Full House, and I'm sure he's done more recent stuff, but he'll always be Uncle Jesse. But John Stamos is a huge Disney guy.
Yep.
He paid $100,000. Again, some of these stories are creepy. This is just on the verge of creepy and weird at the same time. But he paid $100,000 to have WDI, which is the Imagineering arm of Disney, build a replica doll of the Small World dolls. So you're going into Small World, those creepy little dolls that are singing to you and get the song stuck in your head that will never go away. Which would be funny if you lay that track on the background of this as they're talking, so it gets stuck in people's head. But those dolls, right? It wasn't even one that was used in the park. It was just a replica. I paid $100,000 for it.
Like a whole set of dolls, I hope?
Just one doll.
No way.
Yeah.
So wait, so you guys were doing more than just selling what was old or used. You were actually doing like special orders and stuff?
That didn't go through me. That was, he happened to know, like, not Bob Iger, the CEO, but he like knew that echelon of people. And so that was like one of those weird requests that he just made direct. The things that went through me are like the Matterhorn bobsled vehicles, or the hitchhiking ghosts at the end of the Haunted Mansion tour. Like those things, working with, a high net worth individual out of LA that, paid $45,000 for those. And,
got it.
Behind those. So yeah, that was my gig. It was awesome. I loved it. And really it's just building something out of nothing. One, it restored me as a person to know that I still have the ability to do something. Right. It gave me a chance to get my feet grounded again for my family. And then lastly, it allowed me to see my employer as really that first investor to help me start saving up, time and money for what would ultimately be my next venture. So that's really,
how much did you feel safe with to kind of go out on? And you said you started raising friends and family around for your next thing, but it's still got to be scary after losing everything. Was your wife on board?
Yeah, she, Let me think about this one real quick. This is 5 years now. I would 100% say she's on board. 5 years. Let me think here. Was she fully on board? Yeah, she was comfortable because I had raised about 140,000 friends and family. Again, I don't come from money, so some friends and family rounds are in the millions. That's not my story. And so the reason I left Disney was to work for, like I said, Vision Media, to help do what I was doing for Disney for all the studios. Well, the founder of Vision Media was one of my advisors to the mobile app technology, and so part of the agreement was I help build this business inside of his business as well as work on my mobile app. So it's kind of like I had a salary with him, I had friends and family around, and I had more freedom to continue to work on my things. So yes, my wife was on board because of what that arrangement was. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds like a great arrangement. So you kind of like how did that come about where you found that other opportunity to actually, was it you taking what you did at Disney and taking it to the other platform?
So that's interesting, right? And again,
Were you the one looking for that, or was it something?
no, this is one of those serendipitous moments. I built this business inside of Disney.
Right.
Parks and Resorts was the first.
Can you share what the revenue was overall of that?
Yeah. By the time I left, it was $4 million a year. Just one business entity.
Yeah.
I don't get to see ESPN numbers. So like,
right.
As I helped with ESPN with the Jimmy V auction, that revenue went to ESPN, so I don't get preview to those numbers.
Right.
Disney ABC Group was another. I never got to work within Marvel. Marvel was rogue; like they did their own thing.
They did their thing,
which pissed me off a ton of time because they would just sell Iron Man suits when it's like, wait a second, dude, you can't just be selling Iron Man suits. We got to talk about this. So Kevin Feige he's a rogue warrior. But at any rate, so while I was building this inside of parks, Disney ABC Television Group reached out to me and said, "Hey, you're the only one doing this in Disney. Can you help us sell stuff?" I'm thinking to myself, like maybe like a set from a show. No. They had like 60,000 square feet of a warehouse of just stuff they'd been storing for years.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
So I go out to the warehouse. Well, the warehouse was owned by Vision Media. They were just the vendor storing everything. Mm-hmm. And there is where I met the founder and CEO of Vision Media, Michael Alvarez. And the introduction was made, and he comes down an hour and a half away to Orange County, and we get lunch. And he's like, "Just so you know, you're the only one doing this inside of all of Hollywood." And I was like, "What? That can't be the case." And so, sure enough, Disney, I was the only one doing it. So he hired me to help him build another. Because I mean, in his warehouse,
Disney, was this part of Disney? This is not. So
ABC was part of Disney, yes.
Okay. So
Vision Media was not. And so when he invited me over to do it for his business, I mean, the things he had in his warehouse were unbelievable. The Twilight movie series, he had all the assets from Twilight in his warehouse.
Wow.
The original Batmobile, he had that in his warehouse.
Oh my gosh.
He had so many bats. I mean, there were so many assets he had from every single studio. So I left Disney to help him build that inside of all the movie studios. And
did you ever think of an ask of like, "Hey, I'll take a percentage of whatever I sell"?
At the time, no. And the reason being was, for my next pursuit was the mobile app.
Okay.
Was this mobile technology I was building, and so this was really just a conduit to get there.
Got it. Okay.
It was not something I was looking at long term. Needless to say, I was there for a year. We couldn't get the closest I got was for another studio was Paramount. A new Ninja Turtle movie was coming out, and they were doing some really cool in-theater marketing stuff. That was the closest I got, but they just were gun shy about it. People kept telling me, "Well, we're not Disney. People don't want it." I'm like, "You're crazy. Like, people want all of your DC stuff. People want Ninja Turtle stuff. People want Top Gun, Paramount. I mean, there were so many brands, and Disney has done a really great job of building up how significant their brand is, that I truly believe the other studios have forgotten how significant their brand is."
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Okay, so you're there. You're kind of in this middle transition period. Tell me about this mobile tech and kind of what was the evolution of it, and the second attempt.
So the mobile tech, I was convinced that people were tired of using their camera for identification purposes, like augmented reality, right? If you at the time in Yelp, instead of just what's around me kind of thing, you can open up a camera feature and identify the restaurant. Yeah, right. The idea of using a camera to identify something is super clunky. Like I still don't understand the appeal for it. But I was convinced that the technology existed where you could use your phone like a television remote. Like you simply point your phone at it and push a button, and it will tell you everything about that location, ultimately that object that you're pointing at. So picture yourself, down on Main Street, USA, wherever you're living, and there's a restaurant, and you want to know what the wait time is. Just point your phone, push a button, you'll see menu, you'll see photos from Instagram on it, you'll see a wait time, maybe some current reviews from Google, because I hate Yelp. Yelp is the devil for small businesses. And so I would never have integrated with Yelp, with just Google. But again, with a push of a button, you see it. No use of camera, right? Imagine yourself on vacation. You're like, "Hey, there's the Eiffel Tower." push a button and you see, historical information on the Eiffel Tower, construction information, whatever the case may be. It was the idea was getting the information you want with a single push of a button. None of this around me, none of this filtering through lists, none of this.
Would it need an app would you have to open an app to get there?
Exactly. None of the cell phone providers would make it native, right? I mean, Apple controls everything that at the time the home button did. Now there's no home button anymore. And in fact, most of the phones now don't even have a home button. So yes, it did reside in an app, and that's where I had to build an app. The challenge with mobile technology, one, we were able to build out the first concept of it. We were able to really nail out the user experience of pushing a button. So we were able to get to that. The challenge comes in the monetization side of it. And this just has to do with market research, which I didn't do well enough. I started with restaurants because when you think about how you use your phone, most people listening are probably like, well, yeah, I'm always looking for a place to eat. That's just the use case of what people are using phones for: picture taking and food, and sometimes it's picture taking of food. Right? So, so I was going after restaurants first. Let me provide restaurant information because then I can get users to use the app because I'm giving them great stuff. Well, I still needed money in that, right? It's one thing to say you have users, but gone are the venture capital days where they're just going to give you money because you have users. Those days that ship has sailed.
You don't think nowadays? You don't think nowadays it's
about users? No, like now, even still, even inside like when obviously I'm trying to make your Snapchat, right? That was probably a couple of years ago, so that's a little dated. Brex is a new credit card for startups, right? They are the belle of the ball with what they're doing inside of fintech, and what they're doing is amazing, but they're also monetizing. And one of the things that they'll say from the get-go is the idea of users is great, but can you monetize your user base?
Well, the unit economics specifically, there at least has to be a path toward.
Yeah, I mean, look at Foursquare, right? The founder's name used to be on the tip of my tongue. I can't think of it anymore. He raised $175 million before they ever saw a dollar. Right. And last I checked, and again, dated information, as of last year, they weren't profitable. So I mean, it's just, the VC is just not going to keep throwing at money at things. And then again, of course, look at the what was the name of that Palo Alto med fraud?
I saw that. Theranos.
Theranos, yes, thank you. Right. I mean, so again, they've got to see your ability as a founder to be able to execute and monetize. That's the biggest thing. So
tell me, how long did that go before friends and family round ran out? And you said, okay, I'm back to, what was the next step? You said, I'm back to Disney. What was the thought?
It lasted about a year.
Yeah. Okay.
After Vision Media, I then, the software development company that was building my app, again, if there's anything I could point to as far as why I'm not homeless on the street somewhere, it goes back to likability. Like wherever you are, for all your listeners, no matter what job you have, no matter who you interact with, you have to maintain likability.
Yeah.
Like you can't treat people as a commodity. And I see too many people doing that, right? They're in a company for, we'll say 5 years, and then they have great relationships, and then they jump ship, and it's like, oh, those people don't matter to me anymore. It's like, no, like you have got to maintain relationships because these are people. They're not parcels. Like you have to treat.
That reminds me of a meme I think I saw yesterday it was an investment banking meme, and it had an MD saying, what's wrong with him? The doctor says he's in a coma. Okay, well, let me know when he wakes up. So we need this pitch deck out by midnight.
Exactly right. Like you have to maintain relationships and keep those bridges open. And so all I have to say is my development firm, they really liked me, and they were developers, right? So they're not people. They're not people that like to deal with sales, if you will.
Yeah.
And so they were like, hey, we're building your app. You really like dealing with people and sales. Why don't you come do that for us? And I was like, oh, that's kind of a cool idea. Yeah. And so then that helped extend the development of my app, as well as provide income for the family while doing it. And that lasted for about 2.5 years. Me working for them lasted for 2.5 years. The app died within I'm going to say 10 months of me working there, just because they reached a point where you have to call the bleeding. Like, you just got to shut it out at some point. And I couldn't keep dumping money back into it, because while I visually saw how to monetize, I couldn't execute. I couldn't get the restaurants there. I couldn't get the partnerships that I've been working for so long to commit. I even tried to negotiate an acquisition of the technology, that couldn't get that down. I just had to shut it down.
That's tough. That's tough to let go.
It is. And, again, for, not maybe there are some listeners that have contemplated all kinds of different mobile ideas. The app business is dead. Like, just don't build a mobile app for the sake of a mobile app. If you have another business and an app complements it, then build an app. Don't build an app thinking that is your business. Like, that's just, that ship has sailed.
Yeah, WSO, after clamoring for, I don't know, probably a decade, our members were clamoring for a mobile app. We finally released one. We have about 10,000 downloads within a few months. I'm like, probably could have done that 5 years ago.
Yeah, right. And it's a complement to what you're doing. And that's
site that makes sense. It makes sense. And we have an active community. So
that's the reason for apps these days. It complements an existing business.
Yeah. So, okay. So you're you're acting as you're in sales. You're in your natural element. Why leave this development shop?
So when I was with the development shop, they'd been around for 9 years prior to me. So still a new small business, great people, great founders, everything. They'd been in their region, their valley for the entire time. They had been there for 15 years prior to starting the business, but they were not the name within the valley for technology. If someone were to think of software development, they were not the name for it. And I didn't understand why, because they were really good developers and really great people. And so I thought, well, let's start making a name. Let's start making a brand for you to be the technology hub of Santa Clarita Valley. And so I started doing these live events where we would feature founders, big name founders. Rahul Sinha from Testloop. He was trying to create really a point-to-point transit line using Teslas. Incredible company. Baron Davis, founder of Black Santa, former NBA All-Star. Larry Namer from Entertainment Television. Rachel Hollis, who's a big deal now. Just tremendous founders. They would come and unpack their story, and so we'd have about 100 people showing up in our office to just hear these stories. So we were slowly becoming that, and I loved it. I mean, again, being a people person. Love the storytelling, love hearing the journey. Again, the mentorship that comes with those conversations, it was awesome. And so about 10 months in, or 10 events in, about 9 events in, the founder of the software development company said, "Hey, shut it down. We're not seeing any revenue from it." Again, I'm in sales. And I said, "I know, but this is the long game. Like, this is not, we're not trying to do something quick. This is the long game." It's like, no, shut it down. So 10th event happened. We shut it down. And it bummed me out to no end. I loved doing it, loved every bit about it. And
how much was it costing per event to put on?
Oh, the events were profitable.
So what
just not. I mean, I hit profitable, meaning it didn't cost the company anything. It wasn't like we were making anything, anything significant whatsoever. I mean,
was it covering your salary? No,
not at all.
Okay,
but I was doing sales as well. And so it wasn't that. It's just. Certain people just have short-term thinking. And this was one of those short-term thinking mindsets. It was, well, I don't see an invoice within 6 months, so let's cancel it.
Got it.
And all that to say, 2 months after we canceled it, a relationship that I developed because of it, I closed $500,000 in business. So again, long-term thinking, it pays off.
It would have paid off.
Yeah, completely. So anyways, the last event, 3 people came up to me and said, "Hey, do you have a podcast? If you did a podcast, I'd listen to it." I'm like, "Oh, that's interesting." I knew the event was shutting down. I had this need to keep going. So I told my founders, I said, "Hey, I'm going to do if you're shutting this down, I'm going to do a podcast." And they were fully supportive of it. Like, "Yeah, you do a podcast. Great." I even helped the founder set up a podcast for he and his son about gaming, because he's into esports. And so fully supportive. And I was doing this just to fill a need, right? I created the Startup Story podcast to just fill a need of just me meeting with founders. And so I'm still doing sales for the company. About 6 months in, so June of 2019, I get an email from a UK listener. It says, "Hey, just so you know, you're number 11 in the UK." And I'm like, "What?" Like I had tracked no data on anything. It was just, I was doing this because I love to sit with founders. And so I, sure enough, I find a third-party service that can tell me where I'm at across the platforms. And I was number 3 in the UK, and I was approaching top 100 in Australia and US.
Awesome.
Those are my most significant ones. I was like, at the time, I was like, number 200 in Kazakhstan. Not sure why, but nevertheless. So, so I create a little social graphic. And if I'm going too far down the rabbit hole.
No. I like this. I like this. No,
so I create this little social graphic just talking about the success of the show. First time I ever saw ratings. And I get word that there's some murmurings in the office. I'm in Texas at this time. I'd moved my family. I was tired of California, and the company's still in California. So I get some murmurings at the head office that they're bothered by the success of the show. Again, I'm in sales. You can tell if I'm distracted or not. Like I'm either delivering or I'm not, right? So, and so then a publicist reaches out to me and says, "Hey, I just saw your post. I would love to represent you." And it's a publicist I've worked with since my mobile days. And her name is Monique. I call her Mo. I'm like, Mo, I can't pay you. I'm bootstrapping this. She's like, no. I'll find you sponsors on 50% of sponsors. I'm like, done. It doesn't cost me anything. Great. So we start creating our sponsorship kit. August comes around. So now 2 months later, she's like, hey, I need updated numbers and rankings for the kit. So I go on and look, and now I find out I'm number 3 in the UK, and I'm top 10 in the US and Australia.
It's awesome.
I'm like, what is happening here? Like, again, all of this is just organic.
Yeah.
And
awesome.
so I create a new graphic promoting it. Well, within a week of that graphic going live, I get a call from the head office that they, we need to chat. Mm-hmm. And so what's interesting about that, after I heard murmurings and from June, I tell my wife, right, we're coming on November was the 10-year anniversary of us losing everything.
Yeah.
So it's, it's one of those things you just never forget. And so I asked her in early August, I said, if they ever asked me to give up the podcast, what would you say? Mm-hmm. And she just looked at me. She's like, no, you can't give up the podcast. I'm like, okay, I just want to make sure we're on the same page because,
that's not happening.
Yeah. And she's like, no, why would they ask? I don't know. I feel like there might be some resentment towards just the success of the show. Going back to the live events, right? 10 months in, they want to count.
I don't get it. I don't get it because was the show ever bringing them any business like through your connections or no? So it was your own thing. It was your own side project.
It was my own thing completely. But again, I was selling, right? So, and so August comes around, they call and they're like, hey, we feel like you're distracted because of the podcast. And I said, well, if you remove podcasts from the conversation, do you feel like I'm distracted? Mm-hmm. And instead of answering the question, they simply said, if we asked you to give up the podcast, would you? And I said, no. And I said, okay, well, we think we know what the next steps are. What's funny about it, back to short-term thinking, had they simply said, we think you should include ads for our company, I would be like, oh, that makes sense. Sure.
Yeah.
Just to keep it going a little bit longer, but no. Nevertheless, that was, I've been full-time on the startup story now since September of this year, and it's been tremendous. We're now in live event planning mode, and there's lots of things in the works. So I get to meet great people like yourself now.
It's exciting, man. It's exciting. It's scary and exciting at the same time. I think, hats off to you. I think ideally you could do stuff like you did the first time around where you're bridging. I kind of did the same thing where I was building up Wall Street Oasis while I was working in private equity, and it wasn't bringing in any money or very little. Yep. And I knew when I went to business school, I had a very kind of short window of time to figure out, okay, am I going to go back to work or am I going to kind of just try and roll the dice with this thing? And it got to the point where it was bringing in enough revenue. I was like, okay, I'm not going to starve.
Yeah.
I can survive off this and then have freedom. So I think it's exciting.
And you were kind of ahead of your time too, because the idea of providing value content as a business model like that online, especially, like it was new, right? Again, this is what I'm doing now within entrepreneurship, but you were doing it for Wall Street Oasis long before. So I love how you were venturing.
It was really a platform though. It wasn't even me providing a lot of value. It was really the users themselves providing a lot of value, so like
better.
Yeah. So it's, the good part about that is you don't have to hire a team of writers.
Yeah.
like when you're only bringing in $1,000 a month, you can't hire a team producer, at the beginning. So, it's been a really interesting evolution of the business. And as we've professionalized and as the business has grown, I think it's great. But for your story, I mean, I can't believe that after kind of going through what you went through, you still rolled the dice again. And I love it. It's almost like you can't help but do it. You have something that's unique. Your strengths really well. And maybe that book, what was the name of that book again that you recommended?
Strength Finders 2.0. Highly recommend. Strength Finders. Yeah. It is one of the most transformational books I've ever read. Because it shifts the focus. All too often you hear about what are you weak at and train that, right? Like think about physical training, right? Like, I have weak leg, I have chicken legs. So I got to do squats all day and leg presses, right? You look at your weak points and you focus on them. Strength Finders flips the script and says, no, what are you great at? Continue to be great at those things, and then understand the people that you're working with or hiring. Find the people that are great at the things you're weak at.
Right.
And it's just, it really is about celebrating the things that we're independently great at. And I love it. But yeah, it's as I tell my story more and more, and again, in my episode, you'll hear the great detail of the pain and suffering that came from losing everything in the conversation with my wife and everything. But as I tell that story more and more, I realize that there is a part of us that we are innately created to create, it's at various degrees, right? Even inside of, when I didn't think I wanted to be an entrepreneur, and I was just in accounting, like I was constantly trying to create new processes, trying to create some levels of improvement for things. I was trying to create dashboards that had greater visibilities for executives. Like we're wanting to create something. And then as for myself, there is a level of comfort that comes with the instability that is entrepreneurship, and that's why it resonates with me.
There is. And I think, well, for me, it's the freedom too.
Yeah.
The biggest waking up and then the challenges, the variety of challenges that you face every day keeps it really interesting. Whereas if you're coming into the office every day, doing the same type of work year after year after year, it can get really hard. And it can be tough if you're dreading Mondays. It's a tough life.
Dude, there are too many great things out there that if you wake up and your soul is already sucked, like you have got to find something else. And I mean it. Like I'm not mocking the individual that it has a 9-to-5 and they're providing for their family. I love that. But if you hate what you're doing, figure something else out. Either turn that opportunity into something great or go find something better to provide for you.
I think it's hard because a lot of people that come into these highly competitive careers, they've followed a path for their whole life. So it's very different from you. They're on the path at the top, valedictorian of their high school or near the top of their high school. Then they're going to a target school or a semi-target school. They're having to get near the top of their class, getting a 3.5, 3.7 GPA. And they're prepping for interviews. They're doing the modeling, they're driving and driving and driving. Then they get there and they're like, I made it. And they sit in the seat. And then they're like, wait a second, I'm working 80 hours a week. I'm sleeping at my desk. What's the meaning of all this?
Yeah.
And it's especially at that age, it's like a quarter life crisis age. You don't really know, like.
So I had this conversation once and with just a local friend, and there used to be a time when people would get out of college and they would have that one career for 30, 40 years. Right. I mean, my best friend has been with Boeing since it's his only professional job he's had outside of college. And he loves it, and he gets to work on some really cool things, but none of which I can speak to about on this. But those are the anomalies, right? But we look at it with such esteem, as though like that's the way to go about it. But here's the part that I get hung up on, and I hope that your listeners will process this picture for a moment here. If you're 35 or 40 years old, are you going to leave your future up to the knowledge and experience of a 22-year-old? No, you're not. But that's the reality of what we do most times when we allow whatever our trajectory is coming out of college at 22 to be the single lane in which we drive for the rest of our life. That 22-year-old doesn't have the knowledge and awareness, or nor the network, nor the perspective of economics at a macro level, or understand a self-awareness of what it is you want to do with your life at 22. They just don't have that. And yet we stay on that same train the whole time. Like it is perfectly okay to reevaluate every few years.
And I think that's more common nowadays. I think people are doing that. I think the banks don't like it. They have an attrition problem, and everyone jumping from, people still following the path IB to private equity or hedge funds.
Yeah.
But no, it's been really interesting to hear your story. I think it'll be different. It's a different type of episode for everybody to hear that there are other ways to success, and there's
absolutely
other ways.
There are a million ways. Again, I mention this person all the time, but there are people on Etsy that are probably investment bankers that are making another $200,000 selling etched Yetis. Okay. So I'm just saying like if you're miserable at your job, like there are ways to find fulfillment and make a crap ton of money.
Oh yeah. I just talked to a guy today that was investment banking, private equity, left after 10 months, and he sells like shoelaces. Like a custom made shoelaces. I'm like, this is
that's amazing. That's amazing. See, I love stories like that. I love stories like that.
Maybe he'll be a podcast guest in the future, but
maybe.
So watch out for that one. Listen, James, I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your story with everybody. It was fun.
Oh, my absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And thanks to you, my listeners at Wall Street Oasis. If you have any suggestions whatsoever, please don't hesitate to send them my way, patrick@wallstreetoasis.com. And until next time.